Got it. Okay, perfect. Let me get a couple more people in, and then we will start. Sharing, stop share, we are recording. Perfect. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Diane Knispel. I'm the Director of Education at the Park City Museum. I'd like to welcome you all to our lecture series. Our lectures are posted on our website, and the April lectures are on our website as well. We have 2 coming up. And so feel free to check out our website and sign up for the lectures. If you are a member, you will get a campaign monitor email saying what their lectures are coming up. Due to making sure that everyone can hear, if you can please mute yourselves, that would be great. I am going to continue to have people come in as they come in through the participants. So that's great. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Claudine to you. Claudine was offered an adventure when at age 16, she became the first exchange student from her high school in France to California. She never recovered from the joy of living in California. She completed a graduate and postgraduate studies in France and settled in Mill Valley when she and her family lived there for 30 years. She has since moved to the Gold Country, where she continues to chronicle the lives of the numerous and colorful Frenchmen who flocked to California in search of gold, success, and freedom. Besides many books and articles, Claudine appeared on a French television show and a French-Canadian production on French pioneers in Los Angeles. 2 of her art books became exhibits at the Crocker Museum and the Monterey Museum of Art and at the Grace Hudson Museum. She was knighted for her work by the French Ministry of Culture. She is presently at work on 3 books. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Claudine to you and enjoy the lecture.
Well, bonsoir tout le monde. Hello, everybody. I will have questions also from you, but right now you can't answer me. I would like to know how many of you are French, how many have driven coast to coast in the US, how many of you are historians. I'm just curious about you. It's my first Zoom, and I am so happy that Diane is watching over me, because I'm not sure what wrong button I'm going to push and disappear forever. It's something that we have worked on 2 days ago. I was not doing so well then. So Diane mentioned the colorful French men and women who came to California. That is so true of Franceny and Taverny. I'm going to start from the beginning. It is my dissertation on the French adventure in Gold Rush, San Francisco, that got me involved in the lives of Franceny and Taverny. It's an 800-page dissertation, all in French, so that no one in this country knows what's in there, but I don't have the heart to translate it. The appendix to that long story, which is really full of colorful characters about Frenchmen who came to dig for gold in California, had an appendix which consisted of a series of biographies on French artists who depicted California in the 19th century. There were quite a few during various periods, and probably the most remarkable of them all was Jules Taverny. He introduced the Barbizon School of Painting to San Francisco. That is the concept of painting what's outside instead of painting from models and objects and still lifes and so on. His buddy, Paul Franceny, was also very talented. And those 2 caught my attention for a very simple reason. They signed together on a whole bunch of engravings about not just California, but the US, and more specifically, the American frontier. I'm very curious about these things. I love the sleuthing that historians have to do to piece stories back together. So that was too good to let it go. And I started to collect the engravings that have the joint signature, Franzoni and Taverny. Frankly, it took me years because there were so many and they were so scattered. No one had ever brought them back all together. So it took me years and I couldn't figure out what it really all meant. I knew a little bit about these two men, but chronologically, it had no rhyme or reason because the engravings that they published in Harper's Weekly were not published in the order in which they sent them to Harper's Weekly. So you had one day you had Texas and the next day you had the East Coast, and it was a mess until I did it chronologically. I mean, geographically. And that's what this map is telling you. This map is actually a bit of a joke because they did not sketch the frontier from a balloon, from a hot air balloon. They did follow the train tracks and all kinds of adventures all the way west. The balloon is part of a painting that Taverny executed when he got to San Francisco. It was his first painting and it was on the West Coast and it was fabulous and spectacular for all of the members of the art community at the time. So it looks good on that map. The other thing that is not true about my title, Coast to Coast with Franzoni and Taverny, is the fact that there was a Judy involved. And we can go to the next slide. Diane and I have not done this yet. There we go. Now, there's a Judy in the picture at center. You see a dog, a Brittany dog, and that dog was part of the adventure. I don't know if you can imagine traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast in 1873 with a dog, a tent like the one on that picture, your personal belongings, art supplies, including pieces of wood that you're going to draw on. I don't know how they did it. The logistics of their trip was amazing. So on the left, you have Paul Franzoni a few years after their trip. On the right, you have Jules Taverny. And I hope your right and your left is the same as mine, because otherwise I'm going to be totally confused. Okay, Diane. So this is what I learned about these two artists. Franzoni was actually a soldier in the French army. He was an officer in the artillery. He was highly trained and had learned to draw at Polytechnique, which is a very prestigious military school in Paris. He was involved in military action in Italy, Algeria, and in Mexico during Maximilian's reign in Mexico. So he was an excellent organizer, which was good because Taverny was a Bohemian. He was an excellent writer. He was very disciplined. He really believed in the accuracy of what he drew. And those were all good things because that was the opposite of his friend, Jules Taverny. Okay, Diane. Taverny also participated in a war. It was very odd. he joined what was called the Artists' Battalion during the Franco-Prussian War. They fought in January 1871 against the Prussians, and they were decimated because they had no training and could not sustain the war as it happened at Buzenval. So many French artists were lost during the Franco-Prussian War because they joined the Artists' Battalion. Taverny was really totally depressed, like all veterans are at the end of the war. And one of his first drawings when he got to New York is The Dawning of the New Year. It depicts Chicago on fire, Paris on fire, destruction all over the world. And in his picture, he represents 1872 as a ray of hope, a very bright spot in an otherwise very gloomy human picture. This kind of allegory is typical Taverny. He had a flair for the dramatic, and that painting, that engraving really represents what he used to do a lot of in those days. Diane? Franzoni left the army, the French army in Mexico, and crossed the US to settle in New York and take lessons in drawing. He had a particular interest in small people, like the little tykes washing their feet behind the street, what do you call that, water truck. He had an interest in these people, in those street sweepers at attention with their brooms. He depicted the small folks, the immigrants, the different cultures and religions of New York. Very unusual subjects. Diane? So Franzoni came from Mexico to New York, and Taverny came from Paris at war to New York with a commission to participate in a big book that they were producing at the time called Picturesque America. And this is another forte of Taverny's. He loved landscapes. So he did a lot of sceneries for Picturesque America, sceneries of New Jersey, but he had to live, and you couldn't live off just one commission. So strangely enough, the other type of commission he got was fashion plates. Every month, he drew the fashions of the day, as you can see here for August on your right, these women in beautiful attire. And of course, Taverny was known to have an eye for the ladies, so he never complained about that. And Diane? So here I am. I have all these engravings, tons of them, like 75 pages of Harper's Weekly. And all of a sudden, I realized that the first joint signature on an engraving by these two artists was done in April 1873. And moreover, what I see is at the bottom right, there is a description of buffaloes and Indians moving north. It was a foreboding, a foretelling of their adventure. And at this point, I think they had already met with the Harper brothers and were discussing this incredible, exciting project of depicting the frontier. Diane? This is the second one. It is incredibly rich. And one thing that you have to realize is that all of their sketches were black and white. This one was colorized by someone like you or me, or someone more artistic than me, like 2 years ago, 2 days ago, or 2 months ago. Someone just added color to their sketch. Nonetheless, you can see the exquisite composition of the scene. You can see the different costumes, expressions, the father holding up his daughter. Between the two of them, Taverny was the one who did the volumes, the lighting, the composition, and Frenzoni is the one who did the detail work, the costumes, the expressions, and so on, the animals in particular. Diane? So finally, I discover in one of the issues a text that says, what our artists, Messieurs Frenzoni and Taverny, will tell the story of an extensive tour commencing at New York and intended to include the most interesting and picturesque regions of the Western and Southwestern portions of this country. These gentlemen will not restrict themselves to the ordinary routes of travel. They will make long excursions on horseback into regions where railroads have not yet penetrated, where even the hardy squatter, the pioneer of civilization, has not yet erected his rude log cabin. And the pictorial record of their journeyings will be a most valuable and entertaining series of sketches. So I had finally found from the Harper brothers themselves the description of their mission. They wanted their newspaper to publish a view of the frontier as it was developing at that time. It was very ambitious because what I discovered when I counted and recounted all of those engravings is that there were 100 sketches in their contract. That's how many they published in Harper's Weekly. It was coast to coast, New York to San Francisco. They were on that trail for 12 months. And of course, they were working together for most of the time. It's a remarkable mission and such an exciting one that I can imagine how these two artists felt. They were French. They had a fresh look at the frontier from their European perspective. And they both had a lot of empathy for the small people, for the immigrants, for cultural differences. So they were the perfect duo to do this. And they did a great job of it. Diane? So here we go. As I counted, there were 7 double folios. Now, a double folio, this is the size of a Harper's Weekly page. The double folio is really big. It's double that. It's enormous. And they had 7 of these double folios published in Harper's Weekly, the most popular magazine at the time, newspaper at the time. Diane? So not only did they have 7 double folios, but they had 7 covers. It's like being on the cover of Time magazine 7 times. It's an amazing feat. And you can see that the ones that were selected were not for the news, but also just for the news, but also for the beauty of the engraving. Diane? So I had to learn about engravings because I didn't really know that much about it. And the way things worked is when an artist wanted to present an engraving to Harper's Weekly, they would draw their picture on a piece of wood, which was the thickness of the type that the newspaper used. So it was not very thick, but it was very hard wood. So they would draw the picture on there, but they had to do it in reverse, because when you print, you just print, you reverse the picture. So the the type was in reverse, and the engravings, the pictures were in reverse. Once the artist had drawn his picture in reverse, he sent it off to New York, and that's where it was engraved. It was engraved by a large number of engravers, some better than others. And their mission, their job, was to hollow out the places that were supposed to be white and keep just the lines so that they could be inked in dark ink. What patience that took. I can't believe the time-consuming work it was. Diane? All right, so now we know, I knew what engravings were like, but what is even more interesting is the way that the two artists work together. Taverny was what we call a colorist. He loved color. He had been trained in Paris, in a Paris atelier. He knew how to do quick pencil and gouache studies called pochade. On the left here, you see what a pochade looks like. This is Parson City, and he's blocked out the perspective. He's touched up the sky. He has the colors, but that will not be too helpful for the black and white. He also has very good use of lighting. That was one of Taverny's strengths, and I will show it more clearly in the next one. On the right, you see what Frenzoni did when he reproduced the pochade on the piece of wood in reverse, using a mirror. He just added the detail. He added the folks, he added the animals, the dust clouds, keeping the volumes and the general organization that Taverny had created. One of the things that is really cute that he did also is he added the name of the person who owned the store with the awning. And my guess is that that person paid nicely to appear on a sketch that was going to be published in Harper's Weekly. You know, they earned a living as best they could. Diane? So here's another one where Taverny blocked out the perspective of this street, which looks like a road as well, in Wichita. And on the right, you see what Frenzoni turned it into. Frankly, I prefer Taverny's rendering. It's a little more elegant, but on the other hand, Frenzoni gave more detail for all the buildings on the right. He was accurate and was always watching out to report as much on the frontier on each sketch as he could. Diane? Okay, this one is fabulous. On the left, you have the pochade, the rough study that Taverny created. I love that. It's elegant. It has suggestions of shapes that are very artistic. On the right, you have a lot more details from Frenzoni. You have more coyotes. You have more broken down signs and windows, a lot more detail. But the one that is really meaningful is if you look, I don't know how big your screen is, but if you look at the horizon on this sketch on the right, there is a little train with a cloud of smoke. And that tells you the story of this abandoned, busted town. It is busted because the railroad missed it. And so it was abandoned, left to rot, and a new town was born on along the railroad track. So you see, Taverny was really more artistic, but Frenzini was really the special correspondent, always careful to tell the story as much as possible. Diane? Their approach to reporting what was going on was extremely bold. I don't know how you pronounce the name of that artist on the left. He was quite popular in those days, Alfred Wood. But you see that he describes the decimation of the buffalo with carcasses and coyotes, wolves, birds of prey, something very static in a sense. On the right, on the opposite side, you see, on the contrary, a man with his skinning knife holding up a hide. It's strong, devastating. I don't know how the Harper brothers dared put this in their newspaper, which, went to every family in the country, and the kids would have seen it. It was very bold for both Frenzini and Taverny to have drawn it that way, and for the Harper brothers to have accepted it as a cover of one of their issues. Diane? There was no question that every single one of the engravings that I collected was an action scene. I think that was a given with the Harper brothers. They had to really represent the march west, not in landscapes, but in human values, in human actions. If they had led it up to Tavernier, it would have been all landscapes. That's what he really favored. But with Frenzini there, they really represented people settling, building, transporting their belongings across a river that has overflowed. Every possible undertaking by immigrants, settlers, is what they were looking for. Diane? Okay, the last part of what they were doing was also very difficult. They had to write a text. Tavernier would never have been able to do that. So it is Frenzini who wrote texts that sometimes became eloquent. This is called hunting in the Texas cross timber, which of course is a forest that no longer exists. But if you read it, it's a wild ride now through the thickets, now through beautiful openings where the deer find pasture. And I can't read it all, but it's really very evocative. And that was another strength of Frenzini. And a beautiful engraving, double folio. One of the cute things I discovered is that when Frenzini really worked harder than Tavernier on one engraving, he put his name in caps so that everybody knew that he was the foremost artist in this. Diane? All right, so in my description of the talk today, I asked you, how would you go about depicting the frontier in 1873 if you were given this assignment? And based only on the engravings that I had, I discovered that they had gone to a boarding house by the wharves. and they had made contact with a group of German immigrants who were going to move west in the coming days or weeks. So first we see them, and we know they're German because of their caps and various other details. First, we see them asking for directions and information at the boarding house. And then we follow them with all their stuff on a big wagon to the train station. Diane? Now we're on the train with them, and we see the same characters as those that were found on in the boarding house. Now look at the picture on the left. Do you see how Taverny organized the light so that it shines partly on two people, but not on the rest? It's very specific and it's very sophisticated. On the other hand, probably Francini drew the little kids in the front, in the foreground. On the right, you have, again, the strength of Taverny for skies. He really could do a sky with colors in black and white. But you also have their compassion for the immigrants, because the immigrant trains were extremely slow. And immigrants were often let off when the trains were needed for something else, and they were let off in the rain, as described here. So there is a long text, very compassionate about the fate of these poor immigrants that took the immigrant trains. Diane? Here are two of my favorites. The prairie, as it could be experienced in those days. Something tells me that Judy, the dog, was probably walking along the train. It was not going that fast. And then on your right, you have a beautiful view of a young man who is absolutely all alone on the prairie. And his job is to make sure that the mule continues to turn the water pump so the trains can get their water whenever they stop. Diane? All of a sudden, I found another series of sketches with the two signatures that were not published by Francini and Taverny. And my guess is that they had run out of money and they needed free tickets on the Katy, the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad. So they offered their service to publicize the various towns along that railroad. And I don't know if you can tell, but these drawings did not take them as much work or time as the ones that they sold to Harper's Weekly. They were much more basic, but still they were signed Francini and Taverny, and that's how they could continue on their long ride across the US. Diane? Okay, you remember the text about the things they were going to do and see. One of them was to go on horseback in remote regions. And that's what they did when they joined a cattle drive. And they must have spent quite a few days doing so. And I'm not sure that they were both there. Francini is the one who was the horseman. He knew horses in all their moods, and he drew them to perfection. Taverny enjoyed the tavern and, sitting down, making friends. He was extremely jovial and friendly and charismatic. So I don't know if they were both there. My guess is only Francini, but I don't know for sure. Diane? All right, and then there was a stagecoach. They had promised that they would ride in some part of the trail on stagecoach, which I think it's, well, I don't know who called it a cradle on wheels, but Francini and Taverny mentioned that it was not altogether an enjoyable way of making a journey. and I believe them. Diane? All right, so that text that I read you, that where the Harper brothers described the mission, was published in their newspaper 3 or 4 months into Frenzini and Taverny's trip, just as they settled for winter in Denver. The reason being that how could the Harper brothers be sure that these 2 men were going to perform? There were a lot of obstacles, a lot of difficulties, and they waited until they received a sufficient number of sketches to actually describe the mission that they had given the 2 Frenchmen. What is wonderful in this picture of Denver here is that it is not a joint engraving, it's a joint watercolor. Frenzini had learned enough from Taverny to actually do a painting with him, and they enjoyed, I'm sure, putting both their names on that. In Denver, of course, they went hunting, they looked at the mining, they looked at, they went south to Arizona, and just spend the rest of their time in a comfortable French inn. Diane? As Frenzini, at the end of winter, as Frenzini is looking for new things to report, to chronicle, he runs into a group of soldiers who are going to go to Fort Robinson in northern Nebraska. And he talks them into taking one of them with them. Either Frenzini or Taverny was allowed to go to Nebraska to watch the Sundance, a celebration of the spring solstice. It was as dangerous a mission as you can imagine. I don't remember the numbers on the soldier side and the Native American side, but it was overwhelming, the number of tribes that gathered at Red Clouds for that special celebration. And it is Taverny who went, just to honor the better artist of the 2. This was the real scoop of their whole trip. And Taverny wrote one letter to his mom where he says, "If I come back in one piece, my fortune is made. I will bring back the most amazing sketches of life in the wilds that any artist of my generation can have dreamed of." It's the only letter that I ever found. And it's a crucial letter because he's writing his mom. I find that absolutely wonderful for comfort. And you can see that he did an amazing job of representing the ceremony, the piercing, the flesh piercing, and the detail on this folio, double folio, which is in your exhibit, is absolutely remarkable. Diane? They made a deal, Frenzini and Taverny made a deal that now that we're separating, Taverny had gone to Nebraska for about 10 days and Frenzini was going west alone on his own. So they made a deal that they would do 2 or 3 engravings of Utah on their way west. Frenzini, being the chronicler that he was, of course, one of those sketches had to deal with the Mormon faith because it fascinated the entire nation at the time. So Frenzini, being the chronicler that he was, represented a group of women going to very distant settlement. And in his story, he describes how some of them were regretting this and crying, while others are hopeful and singing along. Well, what did Taverny do? Taverny used humor. He did not chronicle something necessarily accurate. He used humor, and Frenzini well prevented him from doing that, but Frenzini was not there, so he took advantage of it. You have to realize that Taverny at that point in his travel was overjoyed to be alive, because he wasn't sure he was going to survive his trip to Nebraska. But he did, even made friends with some of the natives. So everything looked absolutely fabulous in his life at that point. Humor. Diane? This is a more factual engraving he did. I put a question mark because I'm not sure that it was in Little Cottonwood Canyon. Some of you probably know. But this is how they quarried the stone for the temple. And I found a picture of Little Cottonwood Canyon that seems to duplicate what Taverny depicted. Diane? Another thing that they depicted was a scene at a train station, or a town close to a train station. I see, yes, Little Cottonwood. Thank you for that confirmation. Of course, you see that on the left, we have Frenzini's interest in the coming together of two very different cultures, the whites who want to see the Papoose, and the tribal members who are just sitting on the side of the platform where the trains come and go. I love that, that scene. But if you look at the other one by Taverny, and I hope you see it clearly, there is a native Indian there behind the square post, and he's looking at a sculpture of the ideal Indian. And again, he's using humor to depict what he sees. Both those sketches are actually very remarkable, very rich. Diane? So we're going to go fast through these slides, Diane. In conclusion, these two artists, French artists, documented unforgettable sights like tornadoes, called windstorms in those days. Yes, go ahead. And disappearing practices like underground villages that sprouted along the railroad, the railroad tracks. There are still a few extant, and I'm looking forward to visiting one in Kansas. They also inspired others. It is said that Remington, the great sculptor and designer and drawer as well, practiced when he was young by copying engravings by Frenzini and Taverny. Another person, Casimir Stekpo, made it his mission in life to duplicate beautiful works of art in American museums. And he chose one of Frenzini's engravings to reproduce it in the 1940s. So in the wake of this incredible Odyssey, vas-y, Taverny became a chronicler. He became one of the most accurate painters of his generation. It was Frenzini's influence as a special correspondent. And you see that his depiction of Red Cloud's agency is extremely detailed. Oui. Frenzini starts to paint, And of course, he paints soldiers, he paints Native Americans, and he paints horses. Oui. They were completely changed by their year-long journey. I love this. This is the cover of my book. And you can imagine Frenzini is sitting here. He is drawing the scene of Taverny, drawing the group of Native Americans there. Is just a very humorous chain of drawings. Oui. Taverny painted more Indian canvases in his career than any other subject. In particular, the one at the bottom right is the last painting he executed in Hawaii. He was aware of Native cultures everywhere he went, British Columbia, Marin County. Clear Lake, this painting is going to be the center of an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum next year. All the way to Hawaii, where his career and his life ended. Frenzini remained a wanderer. He inherited from his father and squandered that inheritance in scientific experiments like a dairy farm in New Jersey, a coffee plantation in Costa Rica, an irrigation scheme in Southern California, and he was penniless. So he joined the Buffalo Bill Wild West show because he was an excellent rider. And they were packing all of the show, buffaloes and horses, but also Native Americans who hated being on the water. They packed a ship from New York to London, where the Queen Jubilee was going to take place, and they were part of that. He was forever looking for more frontiers, the Everglades, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Guatemala, the Yukon Gold Rush, if you believe that. And then from the Yukon, he went to Siberia and China. In the process, Frenzini developed a great fascination for the Chinese culture. In San Francisco and in China. In general, Frenzini and Taverny reported the real frontier that was later so romanticized. I learned one interesting fact, perhaps not very relevant. You know, the 10-gallon hat, that was not part of the frontier at that time. They wore the bus or the plane, which was low crown and big rim. Nothing to do with John Wayne. For me, this has been an incredible treasure hunt. Towards the end of the book, of my writing the book, I got a little slowed down and I jumped in my car and drove east. And I followed their trail through Nevada, through Utah, all the way to Nebraska and Fort Robinson. And the amount of things that I learned in the process is absolutely remarkable. I am very enthusiastic about these two artists, and I have published two other books. This one is by Frenzini and his sketches of Chinese culture in San Francisco. And this one is the not so small book that we had to go along with the exhibit at the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento. Diane? Believe it or not, I'm not finished. I have prepared a book that tells the story of Taverny bringing the Barbizon School of Painting to Monterey. And I intend to do one of those about Frenzini's Chinese sketches in China and Siberia. And I included that very funny sketch of the explorer going on this ledge high on the mountain, because I don't know, like him, I don't know what's around the corner. And this one is by Franzoni and one of my favorites also. Thank you for being with me. I really miss hearing you, having your reactions, but I hope that this will help you when you look at the engravings, and you will discover all kinds of new details on them. Merci, Diane.
Yep. Okay. So start video. Okay, great. I just wanted everyone to know that Claudine's exhibit is in our museum right now, and it will be here till April 4th. So please feel free to come to the museum and see it. It's beautiful, and as the sketches are beautiful, and so we'd love to have you. Claudine, thank you. Let's open it to questions. Does anyone have any questions? If you can unmute, it's fine, because I can't see a chat box because we're doing it on my screen today. So let's see, escape. Let's see.
Hey, Claudine. This is Ken Jaworski calling. I was born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And of course, as you well are aware, the French discovered Canada before the British beat the pants off of them and took over. So I have to say that I enjoy the newer aspect of the French going through America that you presented versus I'm fully enthralled with fur trading and canoeing, going all the way across Canada in a canoe, going up to Hudson's Bay and then down around all these areas. And what you have presented is basically a newer version of the Atlantic to the Pacific route.
Yes, yes, I'm impressed that you've done those things. I would love to do them myself. I'm fascinated by French Canadians.
Well, I'm not a French Canadian,
no,
but that's
you're
where I live.
On their trail.
Let's see. We have some. We have some comments and questions in the chat. So Sally says, my family drove coast to coast and back in 1969. My husband and his family drove coast to coast in 1948 when moving from England to the United States. Tracy said, have driven coast to coast 3 times, 1964, 1966, and 2006. Not a historian, but love history, and in part French. Robin says, I find all the French places names interesting, like in Oregon, Idaho, and Missouri. And then, yes, Heidi says, yes, it is Little Cottonwood Canyon, and Robin agreed. And Barb says she looks forward to seeing the exhibit. Mark said, thank you. Mark said, fascinating. Thank you, Claudine. Catherine says, applause. Does the museum have her book? No, I don't believe, we have a copy of it in our exhibit, but we don't have the book to sell. Claudine, is there a place where people can buy the book? I'm not familiar with that offhand.
You can buy it from the University of Oklahoma Press, or you can just go to Amazon, so if you are comfortable with that.
Okay, great. And Ellen asked, could you tell us again how and why they decided to paint together, and have any other artists done that?
That's a very good question. It was really the decision of the Harper brothers to have a team of artists, because they got to know those 2 artists separately, and they knew that together they would do a fascinating kind of work. They were so well matched. So it was, I have never seen any other duo of chroniclers like Franzoni and Taverny. I've looked and I haven't seen any other pair.
And then Heidi also asked, is your book on Amazon, which we just answered. So does anyone else have any questions that you didn't put in the chat, but you'd like to unmute and ask us, or ask Claudine, because I don't know the answers.
This is Ken again. Because the French went into Louisiana a long ways, how come these guys didn't drop down into Louisiana as they were progressing westward?
They were really following the opening of the frontier, and that did not include Louisiana at that time. It was really the march west. Louisiana is another fascinating aspect of French American culture. But of course, where I am in the Gold Country, we had a year in San Francisco where the French represented something like 1/3 of the population. They were so numerous.
Wow.
And you go to the Gold Country and you see French Town, French Creek, French Lake, French Meadows, French everything. And
French toast.
They don't have French toast, no, but they have, well, I can't think of a good one. But they were overwhelmingly present in the early days of the gold rush. So that's another aspect of the French American culture, because many of them stayed and got rich. And even today in San Francisco, there are lots of real estate that is owned by French American families.
Great. And we also have two other questions. Did the two artists ever have fallouts? And what was the fate of their dog co-traveler?
What the dog was a Brittany. Is that the question?
What was the fate? What happened to the dog?
Oh, the dog was pampered by Francine. She got a little fat after they got to San Francisco. And whenever someone pointed out that she was a little, plump, Francine got really upset. So people stopped asking about the dog and her weight, and she lived a very happy life because he loved her. As far as, what was the other question?
Did the two artists ever have fallouts?
I think they did eventually. More than a fallout, Francine just returned to painting, to coloring and painting, and Francine continued to work for Harper's Weekly. So their paths separated. Also, Taverny married in Monterey, in San Francisco actually, and moved to Monterey. So his life changed completely, and Francine just went off on his adventures.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone else?
A question: when they started colorizing or watercolors, and they were sending them back to Harper's, did they still have to do all the inking and building of the printing press, or were they able to do a different way of taking their paintings and converting it into the wood carving?
The second is correct. Taverny did the painting. Francine drew it in reverse on a piece of wood, and they sent the piece of wood to New York. Then Taverny sold his painting for a little extra money, pocket money, and that's how we found a series of these paintings all over the place. Kansas and Colorado, everywhere. So that's how he made extra income for himself. I don't know if you shared that with Francine.
This has been most interesting. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I'm so excited to be with you, even though we are so far. The only thing that I miss is I miss seeing you all because it's part of the fun during a conference, but that will come, I hope, once the pandemic is over.
Well, thank you very much, Claudine. We appreciate everything. It was very interesting, and I learned a lot today too. So thank you all. And thank you all for coming. And don't forget to come to the museum to see the exhibit because it really is beautiful. So thanks again. All right.
Thank you.
That was terrific. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a good
Thank you
night.
very much to all of you.
Claudine, thank you again.